I'm going to tell you the secrets of the world's greatest rule breakers, troublemakers, and rebels, so that you too can break the rules, change the world, and get away with it. In preparation for this talk, I was in Parliament Square seeking inspiration. As I looked around, I realised something. There are no statues for people who are just following orders. In fact, heroes rarely ever seem to do what they're told. I think that rule breakers should be considered like great painters whose art often isn't properly valued until after the times. But these times that we're in, we don't have time to wait until we're recognised as great artists or as statues. I think that actually the only thing worse than following stupid rules, the only thing worse than a stupid rule is the people following them. The times that we're in call for change. And I think like digital skills were maybe over the last few years, or right now our growing awareness around mental health and well-being, the next great skill for the 21st century is going to be professional rule breaking. And I know rule breaking can sound uncomfortable, but that's really entirely the point. We need to break out of the comfort that we feel we sit in, because the only real mistake that we could make is that the way things are is the way things have to be. If I was 20 years old now and inheriting the world, I think I'd ask for a refund. These kind of conventions, this level of social inequality, this is the Paradisus favelas in Brazil, has become so commonplace. Yet it's these conventions that sit beneath some of the world's most intractable challenges, from poverty to radical extremism. And this has become normal. That is not okay. There is no shortage of other rules that we could challenge and go out to break. I would suggest that non-circular or non-sustainable business has become nothing less than a war crime. In a world 60% over its biosphere capacity, the notion of taking resources from communities to hit a profit line is unacceptable. Images like this a generation ago would have denoted a war zone, yet now they're immediately recognisable as the output of extreme capitalism. There are many more. The notion of our drug-like addiction to consumerism is killing us. And the drug dealers in this analogy have got to be the advertising industry, an entire industry that has to ask itself whether or not it's going to be part of the wake-up call or ultimately the signature on humanity's own suicide note. This idea of selling happiness over a brand in a world absolutely dying of its resources is a change that needs to come. Or is it going to be the convention around technology? The most connected generation ever, whose legacy may well be a growing sense of anxiety. We're so far away from fulfilling the potential of mass participation when actually the vast majority of power sits in the smallest hands ever. And if we think that where the power does lie, is anyone coming to save us? Is there a greater plan? Has anyone truly got our back? The answer is clearly no. No one is coming to save us. The rules that serve self-interested few whilst selling the future for a small bump on a budget line are the rules that have to be challenged and need to be broken. And I don't think it's just rule breaking. I think it's rebellion. I think that's the sense that we need. And I know that rebellion is a really strong word, but I do mean a kind of a sexy Star Wars cool rebellion. But that's exactly where I think we need to go. Or in other words, in fact, in the words of Representative John Lewis, who led the march across the bridge in Selma, who led the civil rights movement through the 1960s, who most recently led a sit-in in Congress to demonstrate against gun laws in the US. And the way he puts it is this: we need to get up, we need to get out, we need to stand up, and we need to speak out. We need to get in the way. We need to cause trouble. We need to cause necessary trouble. We need to cause good trouble. Good trouble is exactly the kind of benchmark that I think we need to be advocating to a new generation, a young generation who've got power in their hands, an enterprising generation, because the benchmarks that we give them aren't fit for purpose. I'll be goddamned if I have to give Uber as the benchmark of the business of the future of everything ever again to the bright young change makers that I've met around the world who too often are pushed towards Silicon Valley as the answer for everything. The truth is, I think sitting behind so many of the unicorns of Silicon Valley is far too much horseshit. And we are too wedded to this notion of a small community who are somewhat introspective and ultimately have a relatively low EQ, when what we need is longer-term solutions that look to history and that look to the future. So to look to the future, I think it's necessary to look to the past. And as we look to the past and we see leaders with real ideas, and we see movements that were more than just advertising campaigns, I think we begin to see the kind of leadership and change that's required. But as I've looked back out across history, seeking role models for the younger generation that I believe in so much, I found a gap. And in that gap, I found a group of working class heroes and social revolutionaries who I think might be the heroes of the hour and the role models that we need. I would like to suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that pirates, notably the golden age of pirates, should now sit alongside the Levellers, the suffragettes, and the civil rights movement as the heroes that we need today for the future that's coming our way. I appreciate the cynicism, skepticism, and somewhat raised eyebrows across the room, and that's exactly how it should be, because I know the view that we all have of pirates. Of course, but I'm suggesting we be a bit more pirate, because I would like to suggest there are real attributes in this group, real examples of innovation in this community that are well worth learning from. Your skepticism is well-founded. It comes from a really clear place, a sense of piracy that we've all grown up with, been completely indoctrinated in, but it's not the truth. In fact, the truth has been written out of history by the establishment that they threatened. So let me introduce you to some of my pirate heroes. Over here, we have Black Sam Bellamy, age 28. He was known as the Prince of Pirates, one of the most successful and fantastically wealthy. His team were known as Robin Hood's men, and he was most famous for the eloquent articulations and arguments he would make against the dawn of capitalism and in favor of fairness. And over here, we've got Edward Teach, aka Blackbeard, possibly the most famous pirate of all time, the architect of the brand of piracy. He was so dedicated to living this brand that he'd set light to the end of his beard with sulphurous fuses so that he could actually participate in less, not more violence. Some historians will go on the record to say Blackbeard never actually killed anyone. Over here, we've got Black Caesar, one of the many freed slaves who turned into piracy, and he's one of the few black captains that were out there. And over here at the far end is my favorite of all the pirates, Anne Bonny, blowing a hole the size of a galleon through some of the biggest conventions of the day, that women weren't just of equal capability, but of equal intelligence. And Anne Bonny fearlessly led crews of pirates alongside her male counterparts, representing the only place in the world at that time where people of colour or people of different gender or backgrounds would have had equal opportunity and equal say. This is all true. These are matters of historical fact. But to put these guys into context as to where they might sit today, you could equate them to the Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, Jay-Z, and Sheryl Sandberg of their time, because they were the front page news. They were the gossip of the hour. They were almost the unicorns of their day. They were loved and they were hated and they were hotly debated. But they were the news and they were the example of what was to come. The truth continues. The facts are out there. We think in business terms that Coca-Cola were the first people to come up with the idea of global branding, but no, of course, it was the pirates with the skull and crossbones, nearly 200 years before, the first viral meme of its day that had a very clear message and a message that drove their bottom line. The notion of dual governance that sits in all of our businesses and in our democracy, the notion of two houses which protect good governance within all organisations, first seen on a pirate ship, when the quartermaster was elevated to the same position and seniority as a captain so that nobody could return to a predatory sense of power and abuse of power as they'd seen in the Navy. The idea of social insurance. If anybody aboard a pirate ship should lose a leg, they were given 800 pieces of 8 as a compensation, an arm with 600 pieces of 8, an eye 150 pieces of 8, the first written record of workplace compensation. Even a pensionable scheme if people were to lose their position on a pirate ship, were offered another place, perhaps as a cook or something else on board. Universal suffrage, over 150 years before it was first seen in the UK and then around the world, everybody on board a pirate ship had equal say in the matters at hand. Pay equality, on board a pirate ship, total transparency around pay structures and an index linking between the highest and lowest paid. I mean, I can't give the update on that because we still haven't managed to get there. The pirates are still ahead of us on this count. And the list continues. Modern notions like facilitative leadership or even self-organising teams were first seen clearly and recorded on pirate ships. And it doesn't stop there. I can go on, but there's a couple more just to cement this in your minds. Same-sex marriage. First seen on a pirate ship called marriage. It's so sophisticated it even had an inheritance clause alongside it. And if you're still not convinced, I'll seal the deal and let you know that pirates were the people who invented the cocktail. Francis Drake with some mint, some tree bark, some rum, and some sugar. Essentially, it's a mojito, but without the ice. You can see now why this famous quote from Steve Jobs exists when he took the Apple team away and turned that business around and famously came out with the first Mac. The line that stood above the whole team that time was, "I'd rather be a pirate than join the Navy." Because we know it deep down, don't we? There's this sense of rebellion which is so intoxicating and exciting, yet why? I mean, there aren't many murderous rogues in history that it would be acceptable for you to have a children's party in that kind of theme. A Pablo Escobar party for a 5-year-old would be really weird. But somehow, in this notion of piracy, there is something strong, there's something powerful, it's something that's not understood, and I think it should be, because when you look back across history, when we look at major moments of innovation, often they are driven further forward by a sense of piracy, by challenging market failure and unmet needs of audiences and organizations. That's how we move from a monopoly of radio through pirate radio to a ubiquity of choice. That's how the internet really advanced. It's why biotechnology is moving so fast, because the establishment will take the ground and then the pirates will come and challenge and change that. And that's why now, where we stand 300 years exactly after the golden age of pirates, once again in need of rebels who can shake things up, because it's surprisingly similar. In 1718, there's a backdrop of interconnected international conflict, so confusing nobody knew what was going on. There was a millennial generation looking out to a missold future, mass redundancy through automation, a self-interested establishment and a broken society. I mean, sound familiar? And 300 years later, we face exactly the same challenges, and I think we have a crisis of imagination at a level of leadership to show us the way, which is why I think there's some role models missing, and it is time to be a little bit more pirate about how we create this change. So how did they create their change? Well, fundamental to the pirate's success was a thing called the Pirate Code. You may have heard of it. It gets referenced in lots of pirate law, sometimes as guidelines, but these were not guidelines. The Pirate Code was law, and you certainly lived or died by it. These are some of the exact wordings that can be found in the surviving records of it. And to be honest, there aren't many surviving records, because to be found with a copy of the Pirate Code would have been a death warrant. But they were such principles, they were such profound principles, that many of them last and remain over time. So these ideas of flat structures, of self-organizing teams, of democracy, and more participative democracy than have been seen since Athens, and actually arguably more participative than the democracy that was first seen in Athens, because in Athens, only the white men had the vote. And on board a pirate ship, everybody had the vote. So this Pirate Code sat as a series of principles, of frameworks that allowed these organizations to stay nimble and agile as networks before such things were even buzzwords, and they could take on the might of entire empires. And for nearly 40 years, they won. They challenged the status quo, and they changed everything. And so I think if we're going to bring this forward to now, when we find ourselves in such similar times, how are we going to pull this together? What could be a modern Pirate Code? And it hit me. The Pirate Code 2.0. What would that look like? Would it be as powerful as it was then? Could we have ideas that would have found so outrageous? I mean, imagine if we were a pirate crew right now, 300 years ago, and about to set out discussing ideas like, well, we'll pay everybody equally, and we might have female leaders, ideas that were seditious at the time. Where are those ideas now? Where are those kind of ideas of change? Are we dreaming big enough? So I've been out, I've been looking. I'm very fortunate. I've worked with young change makers, social entrepreneurs, idealists, artists and activists around the world, and I have assembled the beginning of what could be a Pirate Code 2.0, ideas whose hour may have come that just might be powerful enough to change the world. I'll share some of them with you. I'm still seeking more. I went to speak to a group of young social entrepreneurs in the Far East. Incredible ideas at scale that could change everything. And I was so profoundly impressed and sat down with them to ask them what their structure of business planning was. And they said, "Business plans, Grandad? Business plans are dead." Which is a relief to anybody who's been involved in a business planning process and has put together an 18-month forecast and knows absolutely fundamentally that you're making it up. I asked them what they replaced it with, and they said, well, we get together and have manifesto jams. We come up with principles that we can make decisions by, we come up with really clear metrics, and we establish some outcomes. And then we get back together when we need to and jam our manifesto. They pointed out that a business plan format is about 140 years old anyway and hasn't been updated, even when business has transformed along with the earth around it. I realized they were onto something. I worked with another organization, a really fast-growing hostel, who are doing incredible work across Europe, and they're involved in the kind of fight back against Airbnb. I asked them what they thought the secret of their success was, and they told me their Pirate Code. Fundamentally, they operate a no arsehole rule. It's very simple. It sits above everything. No arseholes to be employed, no arseholes to be worked with, no clients can be arseholes, and no arseholes are allowed to be guests. And once you've got that right, everything else, amazingly, falls into place. It's the secret behind their success. And like the original pirate code, there are profound and strategic notions, and there are sometimes some more simple ones. But this one to leave you with, I think, is pretty exciting and sits almost as big as some of those original ideas of the pirate code. It's from an organization of pirates called the New Citizenship Project. And they discuss the way that we, about 2,000 times a day, see the word consumer on the back of every product that we lift up. We hear it on the news constantly, constantly, constantly. And this notion of consumer, therefore, brainwashes us and defines our mindset. And in a world that's run out of resources, if you're defined as being a consumer, well, frankly, there's a problem. And what would happen is if we changed every single time you saw the notion of consumer to citizen. If you became a citizen in relationship with the things that you bought, if you became a citizen in relationship with the shops that you go to, if you became a citizen in relationship to the internet and everything around you, a very different sense of rights. What if the whole relationship that we had was based on one of citizenship? And in this, suddenly I found an idea that seems almost impossible, almost crazy, but really simple and kind of logical, and wouldn't that just change the world? And so now I'm amassing these ideas, I'm pulling them together, and they're all similar. They're all similar, and they don't rely on plans. And these are not just these glib words that sometimes, you know these organizations, you turn up and they've got honesty written in 3-foot letters on the front reception, and anybody that needs to remind themselves to be honest in letters that large shouldn't be trusted. These are principles on which you can make decisions, measures on which we can trust, and outcomes based on what works. Why aren't we organizing ourselves around what we know works? So these are the conventions that I'm talking about defying. This is the professional level of rule breaking that I'm suggesting. And around these ideas, the collaboration that I'm talking about can only be described as mutiny. But a modern mutiny, a constructive mutiny, a positive and optimistic mutiny. And if you're thinking, well, maybe that sounds like a slightly random bunch of rebels that you've pulled together there, that's exactly the point. Small groups. Small groups. It was Margaret Mead who said the infamous immortal line that nothing ever changed the world except a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens. And I would like to upgrade that to nothing ever changed the world quite so effectively as a small group of thoughtful and committed pirates. Because this goes back to the very beginning. And as this group of pirates 300 years ago became world famous, and they truly were working class heroes whose ideas had spread around the world, they took them off the ships and onto land. And in the heart of the Caribbean, the epicenter of the global trade and industry and the dawn of capitalism, they took their ideas into an island and formed a proto-democratic republic where all people were regarded equal. This didn't happen anywhere else in the world up until this point, and it was predating democracies that sparked everywhere else. And this proto-democracy brought pirates from all over the world, and they had a great time. That's how I like to think of it. This is radical empowerment. People of colour, women, in equal opportunity, empowerment, not enslavement that was taking place around the rest of the world. This was such a radical notion, but it was also a very grave threat. And it would be, obviously naive of me to say that pirates invented modern democracy, but it would be equally naive to miss the influence that they had. This threat was so grave and taken so seriously by the old empires and powers that they eventually sent the fleet to crush it. These are exact words taken in 1718 from a report that's made to the Lords of Trade back in London. This is official wording and terminology. This is not romantic notion or me overselling the idea of pirates. But the reason they've become so popular, the reason they've become so powerful is because they represent equality. And rum, obviously, and camaraderie, and equality and democracy. These were the ideas that were so powerful, because these ideas were beginning to spread around the world. This predates the revolutions and rebellions that changed the world at this time. This was their crucible. And the powers that be made sure that they were exterminated, crushed, and that these ideas would never be had again. Except, of course, these ideas were had again. Just a few short years after, when a group of very genteel men got together and held these truths to be self-evident. And these colonial governors who were operating and managing the whole of northern states of America, who had been tolerating the pirates' industry and empire, hadn't just been watching and observing this proto-democratic experiment in democracy. They had been funding it and fueling it And it turns out in history, you will see that the colonial governors, as they prepared their departure and independence from English rule, were actually employing pirates to harry the tax industry and harry English trade and prepare America for its independence. So you see, this small group of rebels are profoundly important. And the truth is that American independence, identity, and democracy is rooted in Caribbean piracy. And once again, as the world and its leaders think about the future and think about our current identity and independence and democracy and what it means, we begin to realize that for too long the wrong pirates have been in charge. And it might be time to address that. So this begins with you, because we are all in this together and we all have a choice. We are now either part of the problem or part of the solution. And when I say we, I mean you. And if you too want to be more pirate and tap into this power, it begins with a simple act: breaking of a rule. I truly believe this is an essential skill for the 21st century. I truly believe that we live in historic times. And for those who live in historic times, the hour may well be upon you, like it was the figures that have become statues back in Parliament Square, where I was at the beginning of this. But the question that I ask, if history judges those who broke the rules to sometimes be the heroes and those who were just following orders certainly don't have that same status, when it is the right and responsible thing to do, to not do what you're told, will you be ready for it? So I advocate a daily act of rule breaking to prepare the inner rule breaking muscle that's in all of us. So pick a rule now. Cast your mind to something perhaps you were told to do this morning, or a convention that you come across, or even just a bad habit or practice that's out there, and get ready to break it. Break it like you mean it. Break it today. Break it tomorrow. And then find one to break every single day. You'll know it's the right one because you'll feel just uncomfortable enough when you did it, and you'll feel really great when it's done. No one will have died and the world continues, but you will have found a strength that will take you a step closer to the kind of radical change this world needs, and you will find yourself being a little more pirate. Thank you very much indeed.